right? So people will say, oh, well, for a long time, people were saying you shouldn't legalize marijuana because it's a gateway drug. And their point was marijuana may be less harmful than something like cocaine or heroin or meth, but we believe that marijuana will lead to these things. And there was a huge debate about that because the side that was saying it's a gateway kind of misrepresented how much of a gateway it was. And the side that was, pretty enthusiastic about marijuana took offense to the misrepresentation and often kind of overcorrected in the other direction and said, not only is it not a gateway, it cures cancer. It's everything. You take a little hit of this and boy, everything's better. And it's a performance enhancing drug. Everything's good. And both sides were really inaccurate. And for a long time, we were kind of caught in the middle. But we've been saying this for a long time. It is not the case that marijuana is harmless, okay? People say, oh, but it's natural. So is gravity, stupid. But if you use it in the wrong amount at the wrong time, you'll find that gravity will kill you. And marijuana is not a drug that you can necessarily overdose on and go into cardiac failure while you're smoking it. But it does have health consequences. And what this study is telling us is that for those who are using it in adolescence, it increases the odds that they will continue using other mood-altering substances. And as a therapist, I look at that and I am not at all surprised because what you're essentially doing in that young age is you're beginning to deal with your life using this external thing. The rest of us are coping and going through a maturing process and growing up and trying to learn how to deal with life on life's terms, and we're having to adapt new skills in our psychology to deal with this. But for the person who starts using this external substance, it's a mood-altering substance. And even if it's less harmful than cocaine or heroin, doesn't mean you're not still cheating the brain out of valuable life development so that it can continue to grow and become an adult.
Yeah, and I mean, my stance on this has always been I'm way more concerned about the developing brain.
Right.
Obviously, marijuana is not a benign substance. It has effects, obviously, otherwise no one would be using it.
Right.
But to me, it all goes back to brain development.
Right.
We only get one shot at our brain,
yes,
at developing it.
Yes.
I'm in my late 30s.
Oh my God, you're so old.
I've never said late 30s before.
Say it now.
That hurt. But when I was working with the teenagers, I would ask them, whose brain do you think I would rather have, mine or yours? And they were always like, well, probably yours. You've got the college education and all that. And I said, no, I would rather have yours because mine's done. It will never develop further than where it is now, right? I love playing guitar. Well, I didn't start playing guitar until I was about 22. Mm-hmm. These kids who picked it up when they were 8, 9, 10 years old are phenomenal at it.
Yeah.
And a big part of this has to do with this thing that we call synaptic pruning.
Right, neuroplasticity.
Right. So our brain adapts and it creates thousands and millions, billions of connections.
Right.
Right. But then what happens in these teenage years, it goes through this synaptic pruning process where just like pruning a bush, it starts cutting off connections that aren't needed.
Right.
So the thicker the connection means the more used it is. Mm-hmm. And if it's thicker, then it survives that process. Everything else gets cut, but that stays. So when we start talking about how does this affect language? Well, if you learn a language as a child, you're going to have better success as an adult. If you learn a sport or if you learn a musical instrument, because it survives that process and it gets strengthened.
And so if you're exposing an adolescent developing brain to a psychoactive substance, even if it's not the worst psychoactive substance, it induces euphoria. It's a mind and mood altering chemical, and it ultimately affects the hardware of the brain.
Absolutely, yeah. And so now you have fundamentally changed that part of the brain. It does rewire that reward circuitry involved.
It is more responsive now to the effect of a mind-altering psychoactive substance, which is why this data says, in fact, you're more likely to develop a drug dependence down the line to marijuana, to alcohol, to anything if you experimented with this at a very young age. And that's why the age barometer of 21 is in there for alcohol and marijuana. So let's pivot now. So the big question here about gatewayness. Is it a gateway? Yes, stupid. Anybody who said it wasn't was always wrong. Alcohol is too. Any mind-altering substance that you begin dabbling with inherently teaches you to alter your mind. If you enjoyed that, that is your entryway into the mind-altering stuff catalog. So it's inherently an onboarding of anything. That is not the reason that you should ban something, though. right? Because if the big standard of whether or not to ban something is its gatewayness, then alcohol has no business being legal
then
this
tobacco,
whole time.
You throw
and
tobacco in
yeah,
there too.
Throw out anything throw out caffeine. So like that alone is not an inherent problem enough that you would ban something, right? Banning something comes down to its ill effects on the human health to the point that the state should get involved. So, Nick, you and I have had to be part of this conversation in the last 2 years, the question of marijuana being legalized. You and I are part of the team that's supposed to clean it up whenever people can't deal with it. There's the community gets to throw the party. We're the cleanup crew. We're the janitors who clean up the people that, partied too hard, and couldn't stop. So yeah, we inherently have a little bit of a bias because we're usually the guys having to deal with the aftermath that nobody thinks about. But Nick, let me ask you this: weigh in on the legalization of marijuana. Pro or con? Are you for it or against it?
I'm neutral with conditions.
Okay,
I guess that's how I would describe my position.
Okay, what are your conditions?
We need to put more education and information out into the public about how it affects a developing brain.
Yes.
And that the legality of it as an adult does not mean it's harmless for an adolescent.
Right.
And one of the things that I would say to parents when they were bringing their kids in for an evaluation or something, saying like, well, I don't really see the marijuana as harmful for my 15-year-old.
Right.
So I said, well, would it be harmful for your 7-year-old?
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, well, no, that's crazy.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, why?
Why? Yeah. Why?
The same thing.
Yeah.
The same issues you would have with a 7-year-old is the same thing. I mean, we're still talking about brain development. Our brain kind of starts to slow down around age 21. It's usually done by 25. So that's the brain that you're left with.
So legalization that says 21 years old or older, you're more comfortable with than carte blanche legalization, which is good because everywhere it's legalized, it's always 21 or older.
Right.
But you would also like to see socially for people to be better educated about it.
Yes, I would love for some kind of information to be taught and real information, not scare tactics.
Yes.
Because we know that doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree. So I'll give you my piece on this. So we had to endure a barrage of commercials whenever this proposition was in front of our assembly and in front of our voting republic. And there was one line of argument that the marijuana enthusiasts were making that really bothered me, and I was not okay with it. And I thought it was the wrong line of argument to make. And there was another line of argument which I thought was a slam dunk and got me completely on their side. So the first one that I was repulsed by was when they were saying, hey, this is medicine. You're talking about whether or not we should legalize medicine. And they would put up a veteran with PTSD in the commercial, and he would talk about how horrific his life was and nightmares and problems, and then he'd say, now I smoke weed and everything's great, but you want to make me a criminal. And that was problematic for me, right? Because I work in an entire sector of healthcare designed to address that guy, and I have never once seen anybody's PTSD symptoms forever solved by just introducing pot. Or even introducing just a medicine. Usually it requires intense psychotherapy, and I'm part of that process. And so whenever they were trying to carry around a flag of weed is always medicinal and is probably the best kept secret in the history of mankind, it was so hyperbolic and so disinterested in all the complexity and nuance of medicine that it bothered me. But they still have a point, right? Because if you talk to a weed enthusiast, they say, but Jim, the FDA is not allowed to test the utility of cannabis. They're not allowed to. It's a forbidden fruit. So don't you think it deserves to be tested? In which case I would take a very scientific approach and say, yes, all options welcome to the testing process. I agree that restriction needs to be lifted. And now let's subjective to the proper scrutiny of the FDA and figuring out whether or not it's effective in certain doses for certain conditions. Yes. But right now we're taking your word for it. We're not taking the FDA's word for it. We're taking anecdotal evidence, which is how cocaine started, Nick. Freud was giving people cocaine. Docs used to give you shots of whiskey, or vodka and say that had therapeutic value. And over time, we realized that was not the best and most sensitive and informed way to approach a problem. So that line of argument really super bothered me and made me feel like, screw all this. I don't want it anywhere. But then the second argument really compelled me. That was the side. There was actually a lobby created called regulate weed as alcohol. And their point was, treat it exactly the same. Make rules, regulate it, create a bureau to oversee it, tax it, and inform the public exactly of its bads and its acceptabilities. This is a recreational, harmful substance that we're allowing in certain amounts in a responsible way. If you've done that for alcohol, and we've already had this conversation, and the decision has already been made that in the United States of America, we allow a harmful substance to be used recreationally because we see that the pros can outweigh the cons. But we totally also know that it's not perfect. And that argument won me because I said, yeah, you're right. Like, as an American, you have the liberty to go out and buy Jack Daniel's whiskey. And if you abuse that, that's on you. And I'm here to clean up the mess if you can't handle it. But you have the freedom to make that choice and to use it either responsibly or not responsibly. And the weed enthusiasts were making a very strong case in that point of, can't we at least be treated like grown-ups who can use it responsibly? And I said, now you have my attention. As long as you're framing the argument as, we use this for recreation and we are adults, okay, then I have no business with you. Go legalize it. I'm fine with that. And let's make rules to use it responsibly. And can you also advocate for the public being educated about it? Can you stop, clanging a cymbal and running around the streets talking about how it's Christ Jesus and it's a Messiah that's coming down to save everybody? Like, don't you feel like that's a little hyperbolic? Like, it hasn't saved the world yet. It's not going to save the world once it's legalized. Let's take a step back, but enjoy it recreationally. So, my verdict on it, yes, legalize it. Legalize it with rules, legalize it with conditions, regulate it exactly as alcohol, and the public should know this is a legitimate, enjoyable, recreational, mind-altering substance. As long as that's how we describe it, I'm cool with it.
Right. Well, and part of, along with the legalization, is it being able to be studied appropriately, which I completely agree with.
Let the FDA study it. I'm curious. I want to know the results.
Well, right. I mean, even if it's, you kind of said something about, well, that's anecdotal evidence. And yes, I agree with that. That may be anecdotal evidence, but I still want to explore that.
Yes.
I've got somebody saying that this helps them deal with PTSD. I would like to learn more about that. I want to learn more. And because there's how many different ingredients or chemicals make up this substance.
Right.
And we don't know yet which do what.
Right. And again, I don't want to beat up on the marijuana enthusiasts all that much because I'm not the guy marching with you, but I'm also not the guy voting against you. So please don't, take issue with me and send hate mail.
So don't send your letters.
Don't send your letters. I get it.
You know what?
I got no problem with you.
We do need letters.
Send your letters. But no, to come back to it, I would feel the exact same way about creatinine or about crocodile or anything else that you can find in the world. Salvia. If you come in and there's people going, no, this really helps me. This is really important. LSD and MDMA is being broadcast right now as being helpful. There's a little bit of discussion about MDMA being useful for PTSD. Now, based on that little bit of discussion and some people saying it's been helpful, I do not know that tomorrow we should legalize it across the country, coast to coast.
Right.
That's why there's an FDA. Like, we're not supposed to be the ones as a public who get to make these broad decisions. We're supposed to have a scientific medical process that's supposed to scrutinize this stuff and be held accountable if they're wrong. So whenever weed was being brought in as this cure-all panacea in medicine, that bugged me. But when it was re-represented as a recreational thing that grown-ups should be allowed to use, I thought, yeah, I can't argue with that. Like, the grown-ups I know who use this recreationally and responsibly, nothing wrong with them. And I don't stigmatize them. I don't think less of them. I don't care. Mm-hmm. And then I also know people that can abuse it, but I also know alcoholics who abuse alcohol. That doesn't mean we make alcohol illegal. That was a strong argument, and ultimately it won my vote.
But I'm really interested what you, our listeners, think.
Yeah,
if
give
we're
us some
wrong,
feedback.
Let us know.
Call us out.
Yeah, we can handle it.
Open the floodgates. Let the hate flow.
The floodgates have been open for a long time.
Yeah, they have been open. So send those in. We'll take your stuff.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about diagnosing yourself with OCD. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy, and we are going to dive into our listener mail. And this first question is about obsessive compulsive disorder, or what the public usually calls OCD. Here's the question. Diagnosed myself as OCD, but therapist says I might just have generalized anxiety disorder. So recently, I've been going through a cycle of guilt and anxiety over somewhat regrettable things done in the past, with the fear I may have done something inexcusable to someone, with my mind going all over the place and asking questions here and there, and me constantly seeking reassurance despite no evidence that I've done any harm to anybody. I diagnosed it as real event OCD, since it matched so much with my predicament. However, my therapist instead diagnosed me as having generalized anxiety disorder, which does kind of share the symptoms as OCD, except I don't do rituals